And we're back, sitting here today in the studio with two amazing people that I've gotten to know in the industry over the past year plus, however long it's been. Here with Kayla Fearing and Adam Wagner. Thanks for coming in, guys.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
for having us.
first off, can you do a little bit of an introduction on who you are, what brought you to this industry, and what is it that you do here in Minnesota?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll go first because ladies first. So I'm Kayla Fearing, and my company is Healing Fear Consulting, and I am a healthcare consultant, and I help patients get off opioids and alcohol and onto cannabis products. Thank you. Onto cannabis products and cannabinoid products. I really try to work with patients who have chronic illness or past athletes, Alzheimer's and dementia patients, autism, to really help find the right product for their diagnosis. My background is healthcare. I worked in physical therapy before COVID, lost my job as a physical therapy tech in May of 2020, moved out to Michigan, worked in cannabis out there for 2 years, worked in Illinois for a year in cannabis, and then came back to Minnesota last October.
Very cool. Yeah, I've gotten to know you, especially during that bill drafting process of, and I can say this so lovingly now, if you were the person in the back who was shouting at me and telling me how wrong I was, and now I know how right you were. And it's really, it's been cool getting to know you and learn a little bit more about that medical side of the industry, especially in other states like Michigan.
Yeah, it's been really cool to kind of fuse my background with medicine and now with cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I was raised by a grower.
I love that. Well, Adam, a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Adam Wagner. I started Twin Cities THC back in like 2016 or 2017 in the early hemp days, just because I saw like a lack of education in the state of Minnesota behind like how to grow. I saw a lot of growers at the time still wanting to be like underground and not really wanting to show face. And I felt like in order for us to get legalization, for us to move ahead in the world, we needed to educate the public, educate the population, and then teach people how to grow so they can just do it themselves. I started growing, I want to say over 10 years ago, just because it was too expensive to buy it from my friend anymore. Although I really appreciate him, and it was great for him to give me all the cannabis that he did over the years. But like, man, $50 ace are crazy.
100%.
So as soon as you find a seed in there, you're like, all right, let's go, let's grow. And I did, and it just so happened to be like a G13 seed. And I was like, all right, it failed miserably. I overwatered it really bad. There was no drainage holes or anything like that. So I took that opportunity. I was like, learning is something I'm really passionate about, just figuring things out and kind of figuring it out on my own for one. So I was like, well, let's go, let's grow.
I love that. Yeah, what I really appreciate about both of you and why I'm excited to have you here today is there's a number of people that I can think of in the industry that are very education focused, and you guys sort of fit into that bubble of we're not just here to consume cannabis, we're not just here to sell cannabis, but we're really here to help educate people on how they can use cannabis, how it can fit into their lives, how they can grow cannabis. I think really, I really appreciate being able to share this space of education with you guys.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it's funny, Adam was actually the first person besides my own family in Minnesota that I knew that grew cannabis, and we actually met on Facebook back in like 2015 because a friend of mine from high school introduced me to him because he was like, hey, I know you're really into cannabis advocacy. At the time I was, but I wasn't really out with it because I worked in medicine. So this friend of ours actually was like, add this Twin Cities THC on Facebook, and I was so hesitant. I was like, who is this narc? But then now I know he's one of the coolest people I've met in the state. So,
oh, thank you. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so we're definitely going to have you guys back in the future to talk a little bit more about each of your businesses, to talk a little bit more, especially on that medical side. That's a really important thing. And honestly, we could have you guys on to talk about so many things. But one of the things that I'm really excited to be able to talk to you guys about today is House File 3766. So a bill in the legislature today. Instead of me giving a brief introduction, can you tell us a little bit about what this bill is and the main mission behind it?
Absolutely. So HF 3766 is kind of like my baby in this whole cannabis legalization world. When I went out to Michigan in 2020 and got on their medical program, they have a third industry called a caregiver program. Minnesota has a caregiver definition in our law, but it's not to the same extent. A caregiver program would be where if I can't grow or if a patient can't grow, you can assign someone to have your home grow rights for you. So in my case, my dad has grown my whole life. He teaches me how to grow now. He grows most of the cannabis I smoke. So he would be the person, hypothetically, I could give my rights to. He could grow certain strains for me for my medical diagnoses. That's what I dealt with in Michigan. I had a caregiver. I also at one point did not have a caregiver, so then I had my grow rights back. It also gives the patient just more choice of where their medicine is from. My biggest issue with Minnesota's medical program, besides it being so restrictive, is that any product I've ever smoked from, it has not been up to a high quality for my health diagnosis, for my standard. Just an example, like there's been reports that they've had moldy weed. I have a lung issue, so I can't smoke moldy weed, or it's like game over for me, putting my health at risk. So that's really why I wanted to push a caregiver program, because I also know there are so many people growing black market right now who are growing for their friends and family, that are growing for a medicinal use, not just a recreational party product.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. From that growing side, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about, like, as a grower, if someone was to give you like 16 plants that you were able to work with, be able to grow for them, I mean, what would that like look like on the turnaround? Like from the patient perspective, does that mean, you know, like I have friends that have grown at home and they got like an ounce from their plant. Like if you actually know someone who has that growing background, has that knowledge, what are you able to do with 16 plants?
Quite a lot, depending on the situation. But really the idea behind it is to kind of mimic what the legacy market is doing right now, where, say, you have 8 or 9 friends, or is it 8? 6? Okay.
We're at 6 right now.
We're at 6 right now. 6 friends of yours that regularly pick up cannabis from you, and you're able to have this intimate relationship with them where you know them better than the pharmacist or the bud tender at the local store. So having that intimate knowledge of somebody and how they interact with the world can help you pick and choose what cannabis, your strains or cultivars you're going to use. Especially seeing as how like some of these shops just pick the hype strains. You know, everybody's got cookies, everybody's got runts, everybody's got mimosa cuts. Like everybody's got the same thing in all of these stores because it's what's hot and what sells. And what sells inside of a store is what sells and what they sell and what they market and what they grow.
And that's a recreational market per se standard, where if you're looking for a medical product, you want something that's going to fit with your body, not just if it smells good or it's got a Runts name on it.
Or has those cardboard terps that most of these places are known for.
Yeah.
Delicious.
You mean as a med patient, that bag appeal isn't what you're looking for most? It's just looking cool isn't the most important thing for medicine?
And that has been my hardest issue, being a Minnesotan and moving out of state and seeing a different cannabis industry. Then coming back to Minnesota is I don't feel like we're looking at that bag appeal. We don't want that, but that's what we're being offered. That is all we're being offered.
Yeah. So sort of on that point, you've mentioned some of these problems that exist in Minnesota. Like the reports of mold is one that's deeply concerning, I think, for a number of people, but also just that lack of access. I mean, you go and you find the cultivar, like, hey, finally I found one that works well for me. Oh, I guess they decided to stop growing that one because it didn't sell well, or they stopped for whatever reason. Can you tell us a little bit about how this type of program would help address some of those problems?
I'm so glad you brought that one up as an example. One of the dispensaries changes their sativa strains, or it's like they use colors instead of the actual name. And when I first moved back to Minnesota, I had a patient who started having panic attacks because she was used to their Pineapple Express strain, and they switched on her. And all she knew was it was the color red. So they kept selling her a sativa, but it wasn't working with her body. So that is literally why I started my company, Healing Fear, was because there were so many patients coming into the dispensary I worked at who were so confused on the proper strain for themselves. So with Minnesota's medical program, since it's so restrictive, everyone's sick on it, I wanted to try to offer the best products to the sick. So they didn't feel like they were trapped with just having to buy in 2 different tunnels, Rise or Green Goods, and be forced to buy product just because that's all they have. So that's where I really think a program like this would help address that, because you would have someone like Adam or your caregiver addressing your medical diagnosis. Like, I have mental issues. I also have physical issues where I don't want an indica for my mental health issues, but I want an indica for my body issues. So that's where someone who has that knowledge of the cultivars comes into play big time with that. And that's what our medical dispensaries do not offer to patients.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I've talked in the past about how I'm a med patient here on Minnesota's program. Don't do a lot of shopping at the shops, but I have my med card, and I had that experience of, you can go in and buy the vapes. It's like, all right, so I want this vape. Well, what profile is vape number 17? And you have to call, and like sometimes they know, and like, all right, so they tell you, all right, it's sour diesel or whatever. Yeah. So then, can you tell me what terpenes are in that? oh, well, it's sour diesel. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't help me at all. Whereas I love what you said is the grower, you just know so much more about the product than the person who's sitting at the counter answering phone calls.
Correct. And that's what I learned going out to Michigan was I had the medical background, so I was hired immediately when I put my application to a dispensary in Ann Arbor, where if you've ever been to Ann Arbor, Michigan, every other block you have 2 dispensaries. It's very oversaturated right now in the rec market, not the medical market. A lot of those stores gave up their dual medical license because they didn't want to have to pay the certain fees that came with that. They just wanted the rec money. So nonetheless, with that, because I had that medical background, they hired me right away. And all my coworkers were just college kids that worked at the U of M that were selling the highest percentage cannabis, the trendy brand names to really sick people. And that's where I started to get kind of like defiant with my management is I'm like, I'm actually going to take this little old lady in the corner and talk to her for 45 minutes because I wanted people to understand what they were getting.
That makes sense. And then just because we're a Minnesota podcast, when you said U of M, you mean the University of Michigan,
yes,
right?
Unfortunately, the Wolverines. I'm a gopher, so yeah, not my favorite.
No, I'm just kidding.
But they do good weed studies.
There we go. Yeah. Well, and I mean,
shout out Clement too at the U of M, MN.
Well, and talk about like having an established cannabis culture. Like Minnesota is cool. I think we've had this unique one underground for a while, but Michigan is
Hash Bash in Ann Arbor, all that. And that was, as a Minnesotan, I went out there so naive to Hash Bash. And they were like, come with us, let us teach you. And that's where I really like Michigan's cannabis market because it wasn't this trendy California, like, we're going to smoke all day, this kind of thing. It was really used like, we don't trust our doctors here, so we're using this third industry.
That makes sense. So walk us through a little bit of if this bill were to pass. It goes into effect. We see it go into effect this summer. What would it mean for me as a patient? Like, what would that actually, like in reality, look like?
So what that would mean is, everyone, if HF 3766 passes, if you are a grower like Adam or anyone else, you'd be able to register as a cannabis caregiver with the state of Minnesota. So what that is you're pretty much letting the state know, hey, I'm growing cannabis. I'm growing it for patients. I'm not trying to be some trapper black market person. And that's what Michigan did, and it worked very, very well. They had this really good honor system with the growers and the patients and the state. It's kind of like what Minnesota's going through right now. Our OCM is kind of still building itself. We don't have a director yet. We really don't have the foot troops on the ground to be enforcing all these laws. So it would really be a waste of like our taxpayer money to send people in to bust down home grows if they have 8 plants more or 10 plants more than they're supposed to, especially if they're growing for sick family members or sick friends. That's kind of just where my empathy comes from with like a medical background is, why are we bugging people who are just making medicine? Like, leave them be. So you'd be able to register as a caregiver. You'd have your max amount of patients. And if you were a patient, you'd also be registering with the state. You would also still have to have your Minnesota med card. That would kind of be like the catch-22. So you're letting the state know, hey, I'm being compliant because I am a med patient, but I don't want to buy your medicine. I'm going private. It's just like if you wanted to have someone privately paint your bathroom instead of you doing it. That's how I kind of keep looking at it. Or if you choose to go to a farmer's market rather than go to Cub Foods.
I think it might even be a little bit better than that because we're able to like eliminate the business aspect of cannabis in general and put it back into just me and you. You know, what can I do for you and how can I help you heal in your journey and whatever that means. So, like, getting out of that business aspect, I think personally is huge for the future of the industry, 8-9 years down the road when it's all bottomed out because so many people are saturating the market and throwing mids out like they do in the industry.
I love that.
I don't love that. There's great growers here. Great growers. Stop bringing packs from Colorado. We got it all here.
Correct. And then with that, too, like he said, you would have that patient and caregiver relationship. They would know how much you're using every month. And instead of charging for that flower, the caregiver is charging you for a service. So Adam could charge me for his water, for his gas to drive to my house, for me texting him certain memes about weed, whatever. It just wouldn't be the price of that cannabis, and that's where it would not be taxed. Is that takes the tax piece out of it and puts it again. It's a medical product. You're buying a medical product. Don't tax it.
That's very cool.
So
I love sort of not only the expanded medical access that comes from a measure like this, but also hearing the OCM over and over again say social equity and ease of access to the industry are like our 2 main goals. This almost sounds like a bill that would accomplish not only those 2, but also this third of expanding medical access by allowing the people that are already doing the growing, acknowledging that this existed for decades here, and trying to create that path to legal operation.
Yep, and that's where, again, this is like very genuinely deep to my heart because I was raised by a grower. I was raised by someone who had 5, 6, 7 people that would consistently come and buy cannabis. It wasn't a trap house. Nobody knew because it was a patient caregiver relationship. So even growing up, even before I was in the medical world, I saw cannabis as a medicine because it was never in my home taught to be a recreational product. So even now when I sold rec weed, when I sold medical weed in Michigan, it was still the same strain. It was still the same product. It just had a different metric number on it for licensing. So that's where this would also eliminate that. I really want the craft growers in Minnesota be put on the pedestal rather than the corporations.
That definitely makes sense. So you've talked to a number of people about this measure. This is not something that like you're just coming up with this session. This is something you've been pushing for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those, the main arguments that people are saying sort of against this measure, and then what you say in response to some of those? Yeah,
so I've been working on this or trying to like put it in the politicians' heads since last session. And the biggest pushback so far really has just been like the defining of testing. Are we going to test? Are we not going to test? I'm protest testing as a medical background. I think if you're going to be selling your cannabis in any way or your services, it should be tested. The only issue I saw with that being out in Michigan was there were labs that would not test home grow. They would only test recreational licenses, medical licenses, because of the Farm Bill and federal legalization status. If it wasn't hemp, they wouldn't test it. So that's where I wanted to try to get this put into the legislation without having that be like brick and mortar in the law right now. So people could get out there and these labs could be developed and these labs could decide, are we going to accept home grow? Or are we not going to accept home grow? I also feel just culturally, cannabis growers are some of the like safest growers there are because they're also consuming their product themselves. So that's where I haven't been like, we need everything to be tested right now. Because I would trust something that I would get from my caregiver right now. I wouldn't think they were putting pesticides in there that I was going to consume or spraying their flower with fake terps or anything like that. So it's one of those cultural things too amongst the cannabis industry and the medical side too with the testing, I think.
That definitely makes sense.
Yep.
When I think like the dirty secret of the industry right now is everyone looks at testing and says like, oh, that means whatever you buy is safe. And well, I think like cannabis is a safe plant, generally speaking. Like we've seen with some issues, perhaps just to avoid libel, perhaps out of medical companies here in Minnesota, like testing doesn't mean that when the consumer gets a product, it's safe for them to consume.
It does not.
There's so many things that can happen along the road that, yes, I think testing is important, and I agree with you guys on that. But I think that when we look at what the purpose of testing is, if it's just to ensure that it's a high quality product that is safe for people to consume, I think there's a number of ways to achieve that end mission 100%. That isn't just throwing a lab report and then letting it sit on a shelf for a couple months.
Yep, right. I definitely agree with you on that, Tanner. And yeah, it's like you said, it's not, even if they pass these tests, it doesn't mean it's still safe for consumption. And I saw that also in Michigan in shops I worked at. It's not just a single state, it's every state. It's just when things are mass produced, you run into issues. Just like if it was a vegetable, I personally feel like. So yeah. And
I've heard that some of those tests are editable PDF documents in other states. I don't know.
Maybe other states.
Yeah.
Definitely not here.
Not here. No.
We have integrity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so on the other side, we talked about some of the things that people might have concerns about. But if you were to sort of give like your 1 minute elevator spiel, maybe you trapped a certain senator in an elevator as you're moving up the Capitol, what would you say to them on why this is really something that we need here in Minnesota?
Again, using my medical background on this argument, every time I run into a politician, it really comes down to patient access. And again, using myself as an example, I tried for years to get on Minnesota's medical program and I couldn't. So again, that would force me then right back to the black market if I didn't want to use opioids. So I go out to Michigan, I get put on their med program. I was completely spoiled because then I had so much access to different medications. I could shop rec, I could shop med, I could access caregivers. They have like farmers markets for caregivers out in Michigan. So I could go to a swamp meet on a Saturday morning, meet 5-6 new caregivers in case I ever wanted to fire my grower. Usually doesn't happen though. And just got to network and really see who was growing what in the state of Michigan, who had what medicines and why they had those medicines. There were people that would specialize in PTSD strains. For veterans, there were people that would specialize in strains that they were going to get a lot of plant matter out of so they could make RSO. It really, again, made the grower's craft more of an artistry rather than this big corporate industry that's going to make everybody a bunch of money. Because like I said before, rec product is the same as medical product, so I'm always so confused myself on why we're not just calling it medical product across the board. It's not like they're taking the THC out of the medical product to just make it medicinal. You need all those things. So
I know we've as an industry come up with so many labels for like, well, it's medical. No, it's medicinal. Oh no, it's wellness.
It
oh
is
no,
cannabis.
it's cannabis. Yeah,
it is cannabis.
Yeah.
No one I know personally uses cannabis just to use cannabis. If you ask them like, hey, why you use cannabis? Oh, I have social anxiety. That's an issue. Oh, I have stomach issues. That's an issue. Oh, I'm tired. That's an issue. So it's never just I do it. There's always a medical reason. So it's just a medical product in my mind.
I thought we were all just looking cool. That's not.
Oh wait.
I mean,
What?
the suit's pretty.
I mean, you look pretty cool. Yeah, I'll be honest. That's
showing
pretty
me.
sweet.
I just put lipstick on.
Well, truly, guys, thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you so much for the effort that you're putting into this bill. I think having known medical patients in my life, having experience as a medical patient myself, having seen our industry having so many cool parts of it, seeing this big deficit of our medical access, I really think that's something that is an opportunity here in Minnesota to use our positive language. And I hope that we see this measure make it across the finish line this session.
Me too. I really hope we can get in a committee. That way people can have their voices heard. I really want to thank everyone who's written me statements this week because that was the biggest request I had from the politicians was, if you guys want this, why do you want this? I think in the last 2 days I've gotten about 19 statements sent to me.
Awesome.
And everybody's really got this, super good. Thank you, Minnesota. And everyone's got kind of the same 3 points. It's really expensive, and a lot of people can't afford their medication. So then they're being forced to go back to the black market because they're sick and they want to use cannabis as their medicine. They don't want to go back to opioids. They don't want to go back to wine. They don't want to go back to these negative things on our bodies. They want to go back to a more natural substance.
I love that.
So.
Well, so if people want to follow along with the bill sort of throughout the session, where would people send either to follow along or to connect with you about this?
So Rep Jess Hansen out of Burnsville is the House rep that's carrying this bill for me right now. I do have a senator, but they have not dropped it yet, so I'm not going to name drop them.
Totally.
They're from St. Paul, though. But nonetheless, so I have it in there. The best thing I would suggest to people is this is also why I asked for zip codes on my statements, is you can give me your zip code if you want on my social media. On Instagram, I'm KFear11. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook and my website, healingfearconsulting.com. If you give me your zip code, I will find you who your rep is. And all you have to do is just send a really nice little short email to your rep that just says, I support this bill. You don't even have to go into length. They just need to see that people are doing this. That's their biggest confusion is they are kind of naive, unfortunately. Some of the non-cannabis reps I've talked to, the people who weren't really involved in HF 100 last year, they don't think anyone's growing or they think that everyone's just growing 4 plants.
Yeah.
And I know that's not true, people. I'm okay with that, but I know it's
all
not true.
growing 4 plants.
Just 4.
Not true.
4 in flower, 8.
The Pisces in me can't allow this.
They immediately die when you try to grow more.
Yeah.
Mine do.
Yeah.
So that is where it's legal. You can tell your reps you smoke. You can also be anonymous. Just let me know and I will help you connect with the people if you want to be involved in this.
Awesome. And then Adam, if they want to follow along with Twin Cities THC, where can they go to follow along with that?
So I'm mainly on Instagram, but Facebook kind of does the copy and paste type stuff. So I'm on there too. But follow me on Twin Cities THC official on Instagram. I have a website, twincitiesthc.com. I don't update it as often as I should, but Instagram is the main number one.
Awesome. Sounds
Delicious chocolate covered caramels.
Oh.
Buy them on his website.
Yeah, for real. So we're going to be sampling them on the podcast here very soon. We're going to talk about that
Together
after.
when we come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we'll be right back. Thank you guys again so much for coming
Thanks
on.
so much, Tanner.
Thank you so much,
appreciate it.
Tanner.